Chapter 10. The next morning, Michael was exhausted. Part of it was his fault. He had stayed up visiting with Graham until almost 4 a.m. He wouldn't have gotten such a late start, however, had it not been for his little cousins, all of whom had stayed up until almost 1 in the morning, jumping, screaming, eating junk food, and playing on the new Wii that Uncle Carl had brought up for the holiday. Furthermore, his great-aunt Martha, who drew up the room assignments, just couldn't seem to get it through her head that he was any older than 12, because every year she stuck him in the kiddie room. His mother tried to make him feel better by telling him that she probably thought the room needed a chaperone. That theory was debunked, however, when he'd asked Aunt Martha if someone else could chaperone the kids' room, and she'd responded with, "What are you talking about? You never have a chaperone." So he had an uncle who thought he was 5 years from 40, and a great-aunt who thought he was prepubescent. He couldn't decide which one he found less flattering. It was the 4th of July, and although Michael knew he had a fun day ahead of him, he was seriously considering driving back home as soon as the fireworks were over. He wanted to spend the day with his family, but he'd be leaving first thing in the morning anyway. If he drove back tonight, he'd be able to sleep in his own bed. After lunch, the family headed out onto the lake for swimming, kayaking, and fishing. Michael opted for fishing, the most relaxing option, even though he'd never caught a fish in his life. A few of his cousins fished with him for a while, but soon the allure of the cold lake won out over the summer heat, leaving Michael alone on the dock. While he sat there watching his cousins splash around in the murky water of Lake Texacoma, he let his thoughts drift back to Kate. How had her night with Luke gone? Had they made plans to see each other again? And what if they had? Would their one night evolve into something more? He didn't know Luke to be all that big on commitment. Then again, Luke had probably never dated a girl like Kate. Smart, funny, normal. Footsteps behind him snapped him out of his stupor. He glanced around to see his mother, dressed in a navy sundress and sunglasses, smiling down at him. "Hey," she said, taking a seat next to him and dangling her feet into the water. "Catch anything yet?" "Nope," Michael replied. "You know, I remember when you were little and we'd come out here. You were so determined to catch a fish. You would sit out here for hours, just waiting for a bite." "And I haven't caught one yet," Michael quipped matter-of-factly. His mother laughed. Michael grinned too. "Kinda pathetic, huh?" "I was just thinking you were the opposite. More than 20 years later and you haven't given up. That's something I admire about you, Michael. You're so strong-willed." It wasn't a phrase Michael would have used to describe himself, but he supposed his mother was a little biased. He was her son, after all. She was supposed to think the world of him. "I'm not as strong as you," Michael told her. It was true. From his older brother Jonathan being diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder at an early age, to his father walking out on the family after Jonathan's disease became too much for him to handle, to Michael's accidental arrest at 17, Diane Sinclair had endured more than anyone's fair share of turmoil in the past 3 decades. "I'm not strong. I just do what I have to do to make it through each day." If that wasn't strength, Michael didn't know what was. "Trust me, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." His mother smiled and wrapped her arm around his shoulder. "I'm glad you came, even if you're still in the kiddie room," she teased. Michael chuckled. "I'm glad too." "But you still don't want to talk about what's bothering you? How can you tell something's bothering me?" He was genuinely curious. "Mothers always know," she replied. "So tell me, is it about work?" "No, work's fine." "Is it about one of your friends?" Michael wasn't sure what friends she was talking about. Most of his college buddies were married and in different states, but he simply replied, "No." "So then it must be about a girl." When Michael didn't respond, his mother groaned. "I swear, Michael, there will be a snowstorm in July before I get any sort of straight answer out of you." "Good, it's hot," he grinned. "Don't be a smart aleck. Talk to me. What's her name?" Michael sighed. She wasn't going to let it go, so what was the point in denying it? Maybe she could offer him some advice. Kate.
How'd you meet her?
She's my new neighbor. He proceeded to tell her everything, except, of course, the parts about the ghost, and about her date being television's hottest paranormal investigator. His mother had no idea that he'd even met Luke Rayner. Not that she'd know who he was, because he wasn't that famous, and he certainly wasn't going to brag about it. Well, I'm pretty sure I already know the answer. But have you told her how you feel? Not really, but no buts. You didn't call, you didn't tell her. You can't blame her for saying yes to someone who did. It was nothing Michael hadn't expected to hear, but he felt like she could have sugarcoated it a little. So what do I do? Be her friend, and if the time seems right, be honest with her. Don't pressure her or anything, just lay it on the line. And most importantly, be yourself. Any girl who doesn't love you for you isn't worth it. She smiled at him. Now, was that so hard? No. He grinned. She kissed his forehead. I love you. Love you too. Well, I think I'm going to go help Aunt Martha with dinner, she announced, rising to her feet. Are you going to stay out here a little longer? Yeah. Who knows? I might catch something. As Diane walked away, Michael turned his attention back out to the shimmering surface of the lake, to his cousins kayaking and laughing, and to the great blue heron that watched from the neighboring shore. Talking to his mother really had made him feel better, even though she hadn't told him anything that deep down he didn't already know. It must be a mom thing. Just then, something tugged on his line. Acting instinctively, he leapt to his feet and began to reel in his catch. After what seemed like much longer than a few seconds, the silver hook appeared, glinting in the sunlight and stripped clean. The fish had eaten his bait. Kate sat in the passenger seat of Gavin's truck, pretending to text and wishing she'd had the sense of mind to bring her own car. Gavin had turned the radio on high and stared straight ahead at the road, barely acknowledging his sister. They hadn't spoke much since the night before, and the few words exchanged had been uncomfortable. Kate knew Gavin still hadn't forgiven her for the hole in the wall, and she was pretty sure that Gavin knew she hadn't given up on the ghost thing. So, are we going to act all grouchy and awkward around Mom and Dad? Kate finally asked. Guess so. Gavin grunted as he pulled out a bottle of Super B Energy, which he downed in one gulp. Kate tried not to scowl as he tossed the empty bottle into the back seat. She knew that he was trying to irritate her with all that nasty stuff, but she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of knowing that it was working. Don't you think they'll ask what's wrong? Kate asked, keeping her voice calm and her tone smooth. You know they're more paranoid than I am, especially Mom. They'll be fine, Kate. Okay, Kate replied in a patronizing tone that she knew would get on Gavin's already frazzled nerves. Sure enough, he clenched his jaw and tightened his grip on the steering wheel. You know, we really did talk to someone last night, she told him, well aware that she was egging him on. He ignored her. Gav, what happened to you? You always used to listen to me when we were kids. Gavin sighed. Ugh, fine. What did your ghost friend say? She knew he was humoring her, but she didn't care. He said that he didn't remember why he was there, but he admitted that he was the one that was making you sick. The cool thing is that they were all intelligent responses. You know, actual answers to the questions we asked. He told us that his name was Trevor, and suddenly Kate felt herself flying sideways. Pain shot through her right arm as her shoulder collided with the window, and a passing car blared its horn as Gavin swerved quickly back into his own lane. Gav, what the hell? She cried. Sorry, he gasped, his face even paler than usual. I thought there was something in the road. Well, be careful. Do you need me to drive? No, I'm fine, he said. Well, anyway, that's all we got. Oh no, wait. He started talking back to us, so Luke started provoking him, and that's when he kicked the camera into the wall. Trevor, I mean, not Luke. Without warning, Gavin pulled over to the side of the road and parked the car. What are you doing? Kate asked.
Is everything okay?
Kate, I need you to listen to me. Gavin looked her straight in the eye. I don't want you mentioning any of this to Mom and Dad.
What? Why not?
Kate wasn't sure that was even possible. There were very few things she didn't share with her mother. She couldn't not tell her that she'd met Luke Rayner, let alone had a date with him. It's complicated. Gavin rubbed his forehead.
You want to elaborate?
I just don't want them worrying about you any more than they already do, he said. You know, if Mom had her way, you'd be living with them in some sort of cushioned room to make sure you didn't get hurt again. I think if you told them all that stuff about Trevor, it would just be too much for her.
I guess you have a point,
Kate conceded, although it really didn't make a lot of sense to her.
Can I at least tell her that I met Luke Rayner?
Gavin thought about it. Yeah, that's fine, he said, though she could tell by his tone that he'd rather she didn't. They didn't speak again until they'd reached their parents' house. It was an older house, built by their grandparents back in the 60s. Although there were several things that could have been spruced up and modernized, Kate loved her childhood home and couldn't imagine anyone other than her family ever living there. Before they'd even made it to the front porch, their mother, Terry, a vivacious woman with fading fiery hair and lots of freckles, opened the door and ran out to greet them.
Hey,
she squealed, engulfing them in one big group hug.
Happy 4th of July! How was the drive? It was fine.
Uneventful, Kate and Gavin answered simultaneously.
Excellent. Well, come in. Your dad's out back finishing up with the burgers.
She ushered her children into the house, which smelled like freshly cooked beans, rolls, and even a hint of potato salad. Good. I'm starving, Gavin said.
How are you guys?
Kate asked her mom, kicking her shoes off and taking a seat at the kitchen table.
Better than we were last week. Your father picked up a flu bug at work, and I caught it the next day. That's a pretty short incubation period,
Kate noted. Uh-oh. Sounds like the family nurse is here, her dad teased, appearing in the kitchen with a plate full of grilled hamburger patties. Rex Avery looked the same as he always did. Casual clothes, big nerd glasses, and a baseball cap to cover his shiny bald head. Kate grinned and rose to give him a hug. How are you doing, Pumpkin?
Good. Are you feeling better?
Much. Not sure what I had last week, but it was miserable. Glad you're over it, Gavin said. Speaking of, how are you feeling, son? I'm all right, Gavin replied.
Have you gotten any better?
Terry asked. I think so. That was bull, but Kate didn't feel like calling him out on it. They seemed to be back on neutral ground after their discussion in the car, and since she still had to live with him, Kate wanted to keep it that way. Besides, though she'd never tell him to his face, she really did love him, and she hated knowing that he was upset or stressed out because of something she'd said or done. As a family, they filled their plates and sat down at the dinner table. Once they were settled, Terry asked, So, what's new with you two? When Gavin didn't volunteer an answer, Kate spoke up.
Well, I had a date with Luke Rayner last night.
That name sounds so familiar, Rex muttered through a mouthful of potato salad.
He's that cute boy from Cemetery Tours,
Terry reminded him. At first, Kate was confused by her nonchalant tone. Then she realized that her mother must have thought that when she said she had been on a date with him, she meant she'd spent an entire night in front of the television, staring at his face and eating ice cream straight out of the tub. Oh, right, the loud one, her father remarked.
No, I mean I actually had a date with him, like the dinner at a fancy restaurant kind of date,
she told them. Her parents didn't seem to comprehend. You mean you actually met him? Her mother asked. She was, if possible, an even bigger television fanatic than Kate. And although she'd never admit it to her husband, Terry Avery had a huge cougar crush on Luke Rayner.
How? He's friends with our neighbor. Oh, Kate, that's so exciting! You've got to tell me about it.
While Kate regaled her night with Luke, excluding the bits about Trevor as per her promise to Gavin, Gavin and Rex continued eating. neither attempting to hide their complete and utter disinterest. When Kate finished, Terry sighed. "Oh, he sounds like an absolute dream. Are you going to see him again?" "I'm not sure," Kate replied honestly. She hadn't heard from him, and although he'd offered to take her ghost hunting, she didn't know if he'd really follow through. She liked to think he was a man of his word, but after the abrupt end of their evening, she wasn't holding her breath. It was probably for the best. Even if she did get to see him again, she knew any sort of relationship forming between them was unlikely. He would go back to Los Angeles soon to begin filming the next season of cemetery tours, and she would stay in Dallas, decorating houses for people with a lot of money. And oddly enough, she was okay with that. As exciting as the night before had been, there hadn't really been anything romantic about it. In fact, there were moments when Kate felt more like Luke's long-lost buddy than a girl he'd asked on a date. "Will you be disappointed if you don't?" Terry asked. "A little, but I really don't expect anything long-lasting," Kate answered. It would be really cool to go on a real ghost hunt, though. As soon as they'd finished eating, they loaded the dirty plates and utensils into the dishwasher and left for the fireworks show. The big fireworks display had been in Addison the night before, but Rex and Terry were friends with a man who worked at one of the local country clubs, and they always put on a show for the actual 4th. It was the same show the Averys had been attending every year since Kate was little, probably because it was a lot less crowded than the one in Addison. Once they arrived, Gavin and Rex sauntered off to talk with a few of their buddies, leaving Terry and Kate alone in the lawn chairs that they'd brought. It was the perfect moment for a mother-daughter chat, and although Kate knew she'd promised Gavin not to talk about her EVP session, she was sorely tempted to bring it up. She wasn't accustomed to keeping secrets from her mother. Besides, Terry was a cemetery tours fan herself. She'd think it was cool. Kate couldn't resist. "So, I think our apartment is haunted," she began. "Oh, really? Why do you think that?" her mother grinned. "Strange noises, creepy feelings, but mostly because Luke brought a digital recorder and we actually talked to him." "You talked to a ghost?" Terry's eyes lit up. Kate knew then that had been right. "What did he say?" "Not a lot. Just that his name is Trevor and he doesn't remember why he's still hanging around." "But isn't that neat? I actually conducted an EVP session with Luke Rayner and we—" Suddenly Kate realized that her mother didn't look so delighted anymore. Her eyes were wide and all the color had drained from her face. "Mom? What's the matter?" Terry gave a tiny shake of her head, as though willing herself to snap out of an unpleasant spell. Nothing. Go on, sweetie." "That's really it," Kate replied. "Are you sure you're all right? Do I need to go get you a Coke or something?" "No, I'm fine. Really." Somehow, Kate wasn't convinced. Chapter 11. Despite his family's insistence that driving from Lake Texacoma to Dallas late at night on the 4th of July was nothing short of idiotic, Michael made the 90-minute commute back to his apartment once the last firework had exploded over the lake. About halfway there, however, he was beginning to suspect that they were right. He'd never seen so many fender benders or drunken drivers swaying back and forth across lanes. Fortunately, he made it back home in one piece. He was so tired that he fell into bed without even taking off his sneakers, and slept clear until he was woken up the next morning by someone pounding loudly on the door. He moaned and, rubbing a hand through his unruly hair, staggered over to the door. "Hey there, Mikey." Luke Rayner flashed an obnoxiously cheerful smile. "You look like you had a rough night. What's wrong? Have more than 2 sips of a beer at the fireworks show?" "What do you want?" Michael asked. He was in no mood for Luke Rayner or his cheeky grin. "Just stopping by to see Kate. I told her I'd take her out to Waxahachie for a ghost hunt, and I wanted to see if she was available tonight." "So why didn't you just text her?" "Oh, what's the fun in that?" Luke grinned. You could always join us." "No, thank you." Watching the girl he liked fawn over Luke Rayner once was more than enough. Besides, they'd had the same conversation a million times. Nothing Michael said could convince Luke that he hadn't overheard him openly communicating with a spirit on his digital recorder. Oh, come on. Why not? I bet Kate wouldn't mind. I've told you, I'm just not into this stuff, Michael insisted. Luke heaved a condescending sigh. Whatever you say, Mikey. Kate woke up after a restless night of strange dreams. First, she dreamed that she'd been swimming when, all of a sudden, Gavin came running out of the apartment, warning her that a massive snowstorm was on its way, and that she needed to get out of the pool. Her second dream had been about Luke. They were on their way to investigate an old cemetery in Europe. The people buried there were the world's worst criminals, some of whom were even believed to be demons in human form. As Kate followed Luke around the centuries-old graveyard, she noticed that some of the graves were empty. The woman guiding them explained that they didn't know how it happened, but that at times, the graves opened up and the dead disappeared. The woman then led them underground to a mausoleum, where gossamer blood-colored curtains hid the coffins in the walls. Finally, they arrived at the end of a long hallway, where the same curtains concealed a bright, misty light. Kate reached out to pull back the curtain, but Luke grabbed her arm and held her back. Only it wasn't Luke. It was a tall man she'd never seen before, dark and muscular, with intense eyes and an angular face. She tried to pull away from him, but he held her wrist in a firm grip. She looked back at the curtains, where a figure had appeared behind the curtain. It was Michael. Kate opened her mouth to ask what he was doing there, but she woke up before she got the chance. Thinking back, it was one of the coolest dreams she'd ever had, and it served as a much-needed distraction. She'd been feeling guilty ever since she told her mother about the EVP session. Gavin had been right. It had upset her. Kate tried not to dwell on it as she cruised through her morning routine. She brushed her hair and changed into jeans and a tank top. For breakfast, she made herself a plate of scrambled eggs and toast and washed it down with a glass of milk. She was in the process of rinsing off her dirty dishes in the sink when someone rapped on the front door. She answered it and was pleasantly surprised to see Luke Rayner smiling back at her. "Hey, gorgeous," he greeted her. "Hi," she replied with a grin. "I wasn't sure I'd get to see you again." "I promised to take you ghost hunting, didn't I?" he asked. Luke Rayner is a man of his word. You still want to go, don't you? Yeah. As if he needed to ask. Great. I was thinking we might head out tonight around 7:30 or so. It will take about an hour to get to the old Bluebonnet Ranch, and by the time we get there, the sun will almost be set, but we'll still have enough daylight to get set up. Sounds good to me, Kate told him. Somehow she was more excited about searching for ghosts than she had been about the fancy Italian dinner. And listen, I know your brother would probably kick my ass if he knew I'd been back here, but I wanted to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Inside were 5 crisp, new $20 bills. It's for your wall. That's sweet of you, but you really don't need to do this. I looked it up and it won't be that expensive to fix. For collateral damage, then, he replied. Luke, I can't accept this. Sure you can. I'm rich. Now just say, thank you, and I'll see you tonight. Kate grinned. Thank you, Luke, and I'll see you tonight. Yes, you will, he replied. Do me a favor, though, and don't tell Mikey. He's always wanted to go on a ghost hunt, and I don't want him to get jealous or anything. You know, that I'm taking you and not him. Well, why don't we invite him? Kate asked. Luke thought about it. I suppose we could, he replied. Would you be okay with that? Yeah, absolutely, she answered truthfully. All right. Would you mind telling him about it? I'd ask myself, but I've got to be somewhere in about half an hour. Sure. I'll head over there in a few minutes, Kate told him. Thanks, beautiful, Luke winked. I'll see you at 7:30. See you then, Kate replied, closing the door after him. Then she ran into the bathroom, brushed her teeth, and applied a light layer of makeup before walking across the landing to apartment 1723. She knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. He was probably still with his family. Or maybe he was on his way back. Either way, Kate decided to text him and find out when he would be home. Michael emerged from the shower and changed into a comfortable pair of jeans and a t-shirt. He meandered into the kitchen to make himself some lunch when Brink appeared. "You had a visitor," he announced, taking a seat on the kitchen counter. If it was Luke Rayner again, it wasn't. It was cute neighbor girl. "Kate?" Michael asked. "What did she want?" "I don't know. Living girls don't tell me much." "Oh, duh. I think your phone went off, though." Michael bolted out of the kitchen and scrambled around his bedside table, where he dropped his phone the night before. He had a new message from Kate. "Hey, are you coming home soon?" The message had been sent about 30 minutes earlier. Instead of texting back, Michael pulled on his old sneakers and walked over to Kate's apartment, with Brink following a few steps behind. Gavin answered the door, looking tired, pale, and slightly irritated. His expression softened, however, when he saw Michael. "Oh, good, it's you. I was afraid it might be that tool from the ghost show." "Fun guy, isn't he?" Michael remarked. Gavin clenched his jaw in response. "So, is Kate around?" "Yeah, I think she went down to the pool," Gavin answered. "Ooh." Brink sounded positively gleeful. Michael wanted to tell him to get lost, but that wasn't about to happen with Gavin watching. "Okay, thanks." "Think she's in a bikini?" Brink asked once Gavin had shut the door. "Is there anything I can say that will convince you to not follow me?" Michael asked. "I think we both know the answer to that," Brink replied matter-of-factly. Michael groaned and tried to ignore the ghost trailing him as he trudged down the stairs and across the complex to the pool. At first glance, the water looked empty, but then Michael noticed a pale figure gliding across the bottom of the pool. She surfaced and pulled her hair back off her face. She must have sensed him watching her, because she looked over to where he was standing, squinting in the sunlight. "Hey!" She smiled in recognition once she'd blinked the chlorine away. "You're back." "Yeah, I've actually been back. I was in the shower when you texted me." He tried to refrain from breathing a sigh of relief. He'd almost said, "when you stopped by." Fortunately, he realized that he'd have no way of knowing she'd stopped by if he'd been in the shower, or if he didn't have a ghost friend who told him everything that happened when he wasn't around. "Oh, I can tell. Your hair looks lovely." Kate grinned up at him as she swam over to the edge. "My God, she is hot," Brink muttered. Before he could help it, Michael threw him a murderous glare. Brink was too distracted by the beautiful woman in the pool to notice. Unfortunately, Kate did notice. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thought I heard something," Michael answered lamely, turning his attention back to her. "So, how was your 4th of July?" "You know you could sit down," Brink told him. "Do you have any idea how awkward you look?" At the same time, Kate answered. "It was fun. Gavin and I went to see our parents. We watched some fireworks, very patriotic and whatnot." "Did you get to see fireworks at the lake?" "Yeah," Michael replied. "It was actually pretty cool. There were about 6 parties, including ours, setting them off all around the lake, so the sky was full of exploding color." "Wow, I would have loved to see that," Kate sighed. "Maybe next summer you can." The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. Had he actually just invited her to go with him next summer? He didn't know a lot about girls, but he knew that coming on too strong was rarely the right move. A guy would have to be a lot more charismatic than he was to be able to pull it off. "I mean, maybe you and Gavin could drive up and see them, with your family." If he'd made her uncomfortable, she didn't show it. She simply smiled and said, "Yeah, I think we should." She floated there for a few moments, allowing the water to toy with her long blonde hair before she asked, "So, are you doing anything tonight?" "No." Michael answered curiously as he took a seat cross-legged on the edge of the pool. Was it possible she was asking him out? Did that mean she'd turned down a night in the country with Luke Rayner? Well, I know it's kind of last minute, but Luke and I are driving out to Waxahachie for a ghost hunt, and I was wondering, do you want to go with us? Of course. How had he not seen that coming? He wondered what Luke had told her, how he'd been able to convince her to invite him on their little haunted rendezvous. Say yes, Brink quipped. Michael ignored him. Thanks, Kate, but I think I'm going to pass. Aw, how come? Kate asked. I don't want to crash your date. It's not a date, she told him. Wait, what did that mean? Was that code for something? It's not? Michael asked, suddenly feeling far less annoyed by Luke Rayner than he ever had in his life. So, you and he aren't like a thing after the other night? Oh, no, Kate said. Don't get me wrong, going out with him was a lot of fun, but there was nothing romantic about it. Really? Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. He'd seen the way Kate had reacted to Luke and his obnoxious advances. She'd been pretty quick to tell him how very single she was. Now she was acting like he was just another guy. Had she really been so disenchanted by one evening? Or was that just a girl thing? Really, Kate assured him. But you were so excited to meet him. Well, yeah, he's Luke Rayner. But you don't want to date him? Kate raised a curious eyebrow. Michael knew instantly that he'd gone too far. Michael, were you jealous? She asked, her face breaking into a playful grin. No, he answered a little too quickly. I mean, not technically. Well, maybe a little. Before he could utter another unintelligible syllable, something, or Brink, shoved him forcefully in the back. Caught completely off guard, Michael could do nothing but flail as he flew face forward into the water. He surfaced seconds later, coughing and sputtering. Are you all right? Kate laughed. Yeah, just lost my balance, he replied, wiping water out of his eyes. Behind him, he could hear Brink howling with obnoxious laughter. Guess I'll have to take another shower. Yeah, can't go ghost hunting smelling like chlorine, Kate said with a quick grin. Michael sighed. Do you really want me to go? I really do. I think it will be fun. Besides, Luke told me how much you've always wanted to. Oh, that Luke, always thinking of others. Now he really didn't have a valid excuse not to go. Well, unless he wanted to tell her the truth. So, will you go? Kate asked. He knew he should say no. Agreeing to accompany them would be reckless, stupid. It could potentially throw a huge monkey wrench into his lifelong quest to remain completely anonymous. But just like with Gavin's birthday party, he knew he'd end up going along with them, just because she'd asked him to. Sure, count me in. Chapter 12. Well, look who's finally going ghost hunting. Luke grinned as Michael climbed into the back seat of the Lexus that he'd bought his parents for their anniversary. You excited, Mikey? Oh, I'm having fun already, Michael remarked. They hadn't even pulled out of the apartment complex, and already, Michael was thinking he should have backed out when he'd had the chance. Where's the Ferrari? Kate asked from the front seat. Couldn't fit all the equipment in the trunk, Luke explained, turning the stereo up. The theme from Ghostbusters blared through the speakers. Luke began bobbing his head to the beat. Are you serious? Michael asked. What? It's a classic, Luke said. Michael rolled his eyes. Kate just laughed. So, Kate, did you tell Mikey about our friend, Trevor? Who's Trevor? Michael asked. Trevor's our ghost, Kate explained, twisting around in the seat so she was facing Michael. How do you know his name? Michael asked stupidly before realizing that the more normal response would have been, you have a ghost? We conducted an EVP session in my living room. You should have been there, Mikey. Maybe you could have told us what he looked like, Luke remarked. Michael felt the blood freeze in his veins. He stared at Luke like a deer in the headlights.
What do you mean?
Kate asked. I'm just joshing with him, right, Mikey? Luke glanced back at Michael through the rearview mirror and grinned. Michael made a feeble attempt to laugh it off, but inside, he was fuming. Why did Luke have to say stuff like that? Why couldn't he get it through his thick head that if Michael wanted the world to know about the ghost thing, he would have opened up about it a long time ago? Right before they reached downtown, Luke pulled into a quick-trip convenience store to stock up on snacks and batteries. You never know when a ghost is going to drain your energy, or your camera's energy, so you have to be prepared for everything, he explained, leading Kate and Michael through the aisles loaded with candy, chips, and an abundance of other snacks. I've always loved these roadside stores, Kate said, checking out the price tag on a bag of trail mix. How come? Michael asked. Well, for one thing, they're full of cheap junk food. She grinned, grabbing a bag of beef jerky and tossing it into their ever-growing pile of snacks. For another thing, whenever you stop at them, you're on a road trip, or about to go spend the day somewhere fun and exciting. I remember in high school, we took a day trip to Waco to visit the Dr. Pepper Museum. Seriously? Michael asked. He wished his high school had been that cool. Yeah, it was awesome. But my favorite part of that trip was stopping at the gas station right before we left and splurging on chips and candy. She added a bag of M&Ms to their smorgasbord. The free Dr. Pepper was good too. They paid for their food and 32-ounce cups of soda, or in Luke's case, tea, and were about to head out the door when Kate told them she was going to run to the restroom before they hit the road again. Michael offered to take her drink and her snacks to the car. So, are you going to tell her? Luke asked once they were outside. That you like her, I mean. Not that you talk to dead people. Though if you want to ask her out, you're going to have to tell her eventually. That's not the kind of thing you can just keep to yourself. Do you ever stop talking? Michael growled under his breath. Well, I do host a television show for a living, so you tell me, Luke said. Pretty clever, getting her to ask you to come out tonight, right? I knew you wouldn't say no to her. I guess you're just kind of pathetic that way. Of course, I wouldn't want my girl alone with a guy like me either. She's not my girl. Right. Hate to break it to you, Mikey, but you're a lot easier to read than you think you are. Speaking of, way to be subtle in the car. You know, when I mentioned you being able to tell us what Trevor looked like. If I didn't already know you could see ghosts, that reaction would have given you away in a heartbeat. Word to the wise. Next time, act like you don't know what I'm talking about. Or at least remain neutral. Anything's better than acting like I just spilled your deepest, darkest secret to the girl of your dreams. Which, I guess I technically did. But, all right, boys, let's hit the road, Kate interrupted, striding over to them. Where are the Cheeto Puffs? 30 minutes, and a dozen bad 1980s power ballads later, they'd made it through downtown, and about half the snacks, and were headed south to Waxahachie. So what's the plan for tonight? Kate asked Luke, once the latest 80s classic had faded out. I was thinking of putting you in charge of the digital recorder, since you mastered the art the other night. I brought the SB7 also, but I usually don't use it unless we're getting absolutely nothing on the digital recorder. What's the difference? Michael asked. Kate, would you like to explain it to him? Luke asked. The SB7 is a frequency scanner. It scans radio waves and emits static that ghosts can speak through. It's also called the spirit box. With the digital recorder, you have to stop and rewind to hear the responses. But with the SB7, you can hear them directly. Luke grinned. Is she not delightful? He asked Michael. To Kate, he said, I should take you on as my protege. Kate beamed. So why don't you just use that all the time? Michael asked, trying to pretend he wasn't jealous of how easily Luke could make Kate smile. He reminded himself that she'd smiled for him on several occasions. But it was hard to stay optimistic when you were up against a guy who'd been featured in People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive edition. Because it's loud and annoying, Luke replied. I also brought 2 night vision cameras and a digital point and shoot. One of the night visions is a little less advanced, so I thought I'd leave that one with you and let Kate handle the point and shoot. Awesome, Kate grinned. Wait a minute. You want me to carry around one of your cameras? Michael had thought they were just going to be poking around a cemetery. No one had said anything about fancy video cameras that probably cost more than he made in a year. Well, yeah, unless you don't think you can handle it. In which case, I'll pass the heavy stuff over to Kate. She's probably stronger than you anyway, and put you in charge of the recorder and the point and shoot. Luke replied with a smarmy smirk. Gee, thanks. They reached the cemetery at about 8:45. The sun had already set, but enough dim daylight remained for Kate to be able to distinguish the layout of the graveyard. It really was a beautiful area. After exiting the main highway, they'd driven through a few smaller towns, then turned onto a long dirt road that led seemingly out into the middle of nowhere. With only Luke's GPS to guide them, they passed a stretch of farmland and a wide meadow bright with sunflowers before turning left onto an off-road that ran through a forest. The trees were so close together that Kate couldn't see the sky, or anything really, through their thick leaves and heavy branches. She wondered how many people had gotten lost hiking through those woods. Unwillingly, she imagined herself trapped beneath the lush, wooded canopy, unable to escape, not knowing what could be lurking just beyond the brush. The thought made her shiver. Finally, they emerged from the woods and found themselves in a wide, open clearing. Thin, wispy clouds streaked across the sky, and fireflies began to dance around the edges of the forest. Crickets chirped, and a cool breeze toyed with the strands of hair that had fallen loose from Kate's ponytail. It reminded her of a scene out of a western or a romance novel. Not at all the setting for a good ghost story. Or it would have been, were it not for the cemetery. Sealed off by a rusty old gate, it seemed the picture-perfect old Texas graveyard, with large concrete headstones and metallic words above the gate that read, Blue on et Semet Re. It's so beautiful, Kate murmured to Michael, who was staring intently into the graveyard. Yeah, he agreed half-heartedly. Kate wondered what he was thinking about. Luke, on the other hand, automatically switched into professional mode. All right, Kate, I want you to grab that backpack out of the trunk. It has the point and shoot and the recorder. So if you would, take those out and add the batteries, and grab whatever snacks you want. Mikey, come here. I'm going to teach you how to work the night vision camera. Kate did as she was told, and 10 minutes later, she found herself armed with cameras, recorders, and an EMF detector, a device that Luke used to measure electromagnetic energy and monitor changes in temperature, both of which, he explained, could indicate the presence of a spirit. That's why the EMF is so important to our investigations. It's easy for us to believe we're in the presence of a spirit, but for those who aren't there to actually experience it, it's nice to have some scientific evidence that, yes, something is happening around us. This is the proof, he said. Sounds like a little kid at Christmas, doesn't he? Kate asked Michael. Something like that, Michael remarked. Luke didn't even hear them. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Kate, as soon as we start rolling, I want you to turn on the digital recorder. You can carry it around if you want, but I recommend sticking it in that little strap on your backpack, since I also want you snapping pictures. Take as many as you want, totally at random. Just like the name, point and shoot. Don't even look. Right, Kate said. Mikey, your job is easy. You just film. You see anything strange, any movement, or if you hear something, you try to capture it on camera. Got it? I think I can handle it, Michael told him. Guess we're ready then, Luke announced, heaving his own camera onto his shoulder. Before we start, I usually like to say a few words, let the spirits know who we are and why we're here, so I'll do that now. Kate, would you mind switching on the recorder? Kate pressed the button as Luke cleared his throat. We're here at the old Bluebonnet Cemetery in Waxahachie, Texas. Just a little background information. This historic cemetery dates back to the mid-1800s, and a lot of pioneers and cotton barons are said to be buried here. Then he addressed the ghosts. To anyone who might be listening, hello, my name is Luke. These are my friends Kate and Mikey. We're just here to talk to you. A heavy silence descended on the graveyard. Kate glanced over at Michael. His brow was furrowed, and his eyes scanned the entire cemetery. It almost seemed like he was looking for something. "Do you guys want to add anything?" Luke asked. Michael remained silent, so Kate spoke up. "Hi, everyone. If you're here, please let us know. I'd love to see you." She hoped she didn't sound too foolish speaking to the wind. The investigation began as soon as what remained of the soft glow of daylight began to fade from the sky. In the darkness, the ethereal beauty of the scenery surrounding the graveyard gave way to an eerie stillness, one that caused the hairs on the back of Kate's neck to stand on end. Illuminated only by the light of the waning moon, the headstones of the graveyard seemed far more sinister and ominous. If she didn't know better, she'd have sworn that the eyes of the angels perched atop several graves were following them as they made their way to the center of the cemetery. "Okay, I'm not really picking anything up on the EMF detector. Kate, I think I'm just going to ask a few questions and see if we get any responses on the digital recorder. Mikey, you just keep an eye out for anything unusual." Luke cleared his throat. "Hello? Is anyone there?" He paused for a few seconds. "Who are you? How did you die?" Somewhere, just beyond the perimeter of the cemetery, something rustled through the tall grass. Kate gasped and, thinking it might be something paranormal, whirled around to snap a picture. Eager to see if she'd captured anything, she pressed the play button on the camera and reviewed the photograph. Lots of dry grass, the iron gate, a headstone or two, and the startled eyes and long ears of a wild Texas jackrabbit. No ghost. "Anything?" Luke asked Kate after she'd taken the picture. "No." She sounded disappointed. "Mikey, you see anything?" "Nope," Michael replied without tearing his eyes away from the camera screen. As long as he kept his eyes glued to the screen, he knew he wouldn't see anything. It wasn't impossible to catch a spirit on camera. Luke and his crew had proven that enough to land them their own television show. But more often than not, they barely had the energy to manifest themselves to the general public. It took a lot more than that to be able to allow themselves to appear on video or in a photograph. For example, he could take 100 pictures of Brink, and chances were he wouldn't appear in any of them. "Did you hear anything?" Luke asked. "Just crickets." It was true. The only ghost he'd seen all night had been hanging around the entrance to the forest. He'd been sitting at the base of a tree, looking lost and forlorn. The cemetery, however, was as still and silent as a church on a Monday. It was possible that it was haunted, and they'd just hit it on an off night. It was more likely, however, that those who'd made the claims of ghostly noises and apparitions had just let their imaginations and fear get the better of them. Michael had found that was often the case with cemeteries. People expected them to be haunted, so they took every little noise or movement caught out of the corner of their eye as a sign from the other side. In his experience, however, he'd found most cemeteries to be far less spiritually active than other more public places. Brink's theory as to why that was that no one wanted to hang around a cemetery all day. Ghosts were still the people they'd been in life, unless they just really liked hanging around at graveyards, or thought it was the ghostly thing to do. They were far more likely to spend time around their loved ones, or places that brought them joy and comfort. The ones who did haunt cemeteries, he guessed, were the ones that were either bitter about their passings or still so attached to their lost lives that they wanted to remain as close to their earthly bodies as possible. "Well, the night is still young," Luke observed. "Kate, why don't you try snapping a few more pictures?" She did. When she went to review the pictures, Luke and Michael leaned over her shoulders. Most pictures showed nothing out of the ordinary. However, they did come across one with a tiny ball of light floating in front of one of the headstones. "Look, an orb!" Kate exclaimed. "Do you think it's a spirit?" Michael could have told her that it wasn't, but seeing the delighted look on her face was reason enough for him to keep his mouth shut. Luke, however, didn't seem to have the same reservations. "It could be," but more often than not, these orbs are debunked as light anomalies or bugs.
Oh, was all Kate said before they were caught off guard by the blinding beam of an LED flashlight.
"Who's there?"
The rough and deeply southern voice of an older man called through the darkness. Trying to avoid staring directly into the light, Michael was able to make out a man's broad silhouette marching towards them.
"You kids aren't supposed to be out here. No one's permitted after dark."
"I'm sorry, sir. We didn't know." Luke stood and held out his hand. "I'm Luke Rayner. You might recognize me from the Discovery Channel."
"I don't get cable. What are you doing out here?"
Michael's eyes finally adjusted enough to make out the man's features. He looked to be in his mid-50s, but he was so weathered that he may have actually been younger. His light brown hair was gray and frazzled, and he wore an old red plaid shirt and tattered jeans. "Well, you see, I'm a paranormal investigator. Actually, a famous paranormal investigator. Have my own show and everything," Luke explained, brimming with pride. The man wasn't impressed.
"If you're so famous, what are you doing filming out here?"
Luke's face fell. Michael tried not to smirk. "We heard your cemetery was haunted, and we thought it might be fun to check it out," Kate explained. "We're sorry we disturbed you. We didn't know there was a curfew." The man finally seemed to understand.
"Oh, so you're one of them ghost hunters. I get it," he said to Luke. "Well, I'm afraid you're not going to find much out here. Worked here for almost 20 years now, and I've never seen hide nor hair of any sort of specter."
Damn it," Luke sighed, looking defeated.
"However," the man continued, "I hear lots of reports of a girl haunting the old bridal barn a few miles that way." He pointed west.
"Bridal barn?" Luke asked.
"Oh, yeah. A few years back, the chapel at Bluebonnet Trail was one of the most popular spots for weddings in the country, and all the brides were allowed to stay and get ready in the bridal barn. Then one evening, a girl was found stabbed to death in her wedding dress, just moments before the ceremony."
"Oh my God," Kate whispered.
"Yeah, it was a real shame. The fella that did it wound up killing himself, too. Jealous groomsman always had a thing for her. Anyway, they tried to open it up a few months later, but almost every bride after her ended up reporting really strange things happening in the barn. A few even saw her. It got so bad that they decided to shut it down, but the barn is still there. And if talk is to be believed, so is she."
Luke looked at Kate and Michael. "What do you think, guys? Want to check it out?" he asked.
"Do whatever you want. Just get off this property,"
the older man ordered, before he turned and disappeared into the darkness.
"Well?"
Luke prodded. "I'm down," Kate said. "Besides, we came all this way. Might as well make the most of it while we're here." They both looked at Michael. He knew he was outnumbered.
"Sure, let's go."